I'm not being a sook when I'm recording this, right? But I do think it's something that we all need to listen to and understand what they're saying, right? Because there are, and I think too many of us jump forward to get out of it once we've asked it. Not saying we don't care, but I think if you're going to have a good relationship with your partner, friend, mate, associates, there needs to be a ground of time and honesty shown and put forward. Okay? So just listen to this, all right?
No trivial gadget. And if you're not careful with it, it will turn on you. We'll build authoritarian presumptions into our artificial intelligence systems, for example, and then look the hell out. So if you're going to have a hydrogen bomb, you better be wise enough to wield it.
On that point of the encouragement of the individual, we all have people in our lives that we want to encourage.
We hope.
Yeah, we hope, right? And we sometimes fall foul of trying to force our own bias, our own intention for them on them. What is the best way? If I've got a friend in my life or a partner that I want to encourage to come out of their place of despair into a better place, how do I effectively do that without overpowering them or stifling them or making them feel inadequate, which is sometimes the consequence of trying to change someone you love?
Well, example's good. But then I would say disabuse yourself of the notion that you know what is best for this person. You don't, not only do you not know, you actually don't want that responsibility for two reasons. Let's say they do what you say and something good happens to them. Well, whose victory is that? Yours or theirs? And if it's yours, did you just steal it? And then let's say they fail following your advice. Well, they pay the price for that. And you can skip away merrily and say, well, I should have spoke more carefully. It's like, you don't mess about with people's destiny. You do not know where they're headed. Now, having said that, you do what you're doing in this interview, in this podcast. You ask people questions, real questions, like, how are you feeling? Oh, I'm not doing so good today. Well, what's up? What's going on? And you can't think, well, I'm going to ask questions to lead this person in a particular direction, because that's the same game, the same instrumental game. You have to see what it is that you want to know. I see this when people ask me questions after my lectures, now and then, or during a Q&A, now and then people get up and they'll ask a real question. It's part of the ongoing dialogue. Something struck them. They stand up. There's something they really want to know. It's an honest question. And that goes real well. But not infrequently, someone stands up with a little prepared speech that's packaged as a question. So I get this from Christian traditionalists fairly frequently. They get up and they ask me about my religious convictions, but really what they want to do is corner me into admitting that I should accept Jesus Christ as my savior and join a particular, let's say, denomination. It's not a question. It's just a manipulation. And so your questions, like your statements, your questions should be honest. And if you ask people questions and you really listen, they will untangle themselves. And that's partly why people love to be attended to, like if I meet people on the street, I ask them their name. They're all usually flustered when they come up to me. They don't really want to interrupt me, and then they're flustered. And the first thing I do is shake their hand and ask them their name, and I listen.
Right, I want to stop there. I have lived a life that most people would relate to a movie. It's made me who I am. I care about people, all people. People I don't know. I don't like fighting. I don't like bullying. Although, yep, that's the life I've sort of gotten into and stand by, and watched as I've grown up of other men in my life, mainly key people like my grandfather. He fought in World War One and Two. I would not consider him as a bad person. And what he told me and what he did and how I got to know him after all of that, and watching my grandfather doing things for others around his area where he lived, painting houses for free for elderly women who lost their husbands, and just helping people in general. And saying that he could easily, quickly turn to violence if there was something unjust going on. For example, he was attempted to be robbed at Box Hill Shopping Centre by some kids, and he did not end up getting mugged. They ran crying. And I don't need to tell you how that went down, but let me tell you, it wasn't words. My grandfather was a smart man. He knew how to use his mouth and he knew words. But when it comes to people like that, words don't work. And I've have a group of friends that I classify as good friends and stuff. They're all similar, and I feel as though I'm the black sheep, because they've all asked themselves and each other questions, but I don't think the question's been asked of me. And I think people look at me and think that I'm just violent, I only know a life of crime, and things like that, when I've actually done a lot of other things outside of that. Yeah, so anyway, just listen to this, alright? Okay. Oscar.
Not that good at remembering names, but I listen.
Oscar.
And they know how to say their name, and so it kind of settles them down, and then it sort of marks them out as a person against the background, eh?
Good boy.
And then if I pay attention to them and listen, they will tell me something in like 10 seconds that I need to know, because they have something to say, And then if you listen, people tell you what they have to say, and then you get wise because you collect all that. And so you want to help someone. Well, first of all, you decide that you're aiming towards help, right? And that you do that in the spirit of ignorance. This is what every good clinician learns, is I don't know where you're headed. I don't know what's wrong with you. This is a hard problem, man. It's like, what's your problem? I don't know what your problem is. So let's find that out first, and then let's find out. One thing you can ask people, this is actually useful in an argument with someone you love. They're upset with you. What are your preconditions for satisfaction? Now, I wouldn't state it like that. It's like, if I could give you what you wanted right now in the context of this argument, and I wasn't doing it in a manipulative way, what is it that I would have to say or do that would in principle satisfy you? And that's a hard question, And the person might say, well, I think you should apologize and about this, and then I will say, what words should I use? And they'll say, well, if you loved me, you'd know. And I would say, no, I'm stupid and ignorant, and I don't know what the right words are to satisfy you. So why don't you give me a hand with that, and I'll utter them inelegantly and awkwardly in a good faith demonstration of my commitment to peace. And that won't be so good, because maybe it would have been better if I came up with it myself, but maybe next time I can do slightly better. And that works. It requires the person who's after you to think through the question even of whether there's anything that could be said or done that would satisfy them. And if the answer to that is no, well, probably the relationship is over. But certainly the person that they're accusing has been put in an absolutely impossible position. But usually, almost inevitably, if the person meditates on it for a bit, there is something that would satisfy them that can be negotiated, as long as they're willing to give you the opportunity to do it, stupidly and badly. So listening, man. Jimmy Carr, I talked to Jimmy Carr 2 weeks ago, the
Oh,
famous
really?
comedian. Yeah,
He was
it was
here.
real interesting. He said comedy is the most dialogical of the entertainment forms. And I thought, well, what do you mean by that? Because you're just it's a monologue, right? Now I do monologues, but I pay attention to the audience, right? I'm always talking to individual people in the audience and watching their reactions and listening to the audience as a whole. So even though it's a lecture, let's say, or a talk, I'm watching the audience and responding. So we're in a kind of dance. Well, Carr pointed out that comedians, before they hit the road, and this is virtually invariably the case, they have their new routines. So their corpus of potentially funny jokes. And then they do 200 shows in front of small audiences. And the audience either laughs or doesn't. And if you're listening, you collect all the jokes that people laugh at. If you do that 200 times, you have nothing but hilarious material. But you listen, and then you can go out on the road. And that was very interesting to me because humor is a mysterious phenomenon, experientially and conceptually. And it's sort of precognitive and instinctual, but it's also extremely sophisticated. And there's an element of transcendence about it, right? Because you can laugh at yourself. And that's in some sense the highest form of humor. And so it's so interesting that we can criticize and elevate ourselves at the same time, and that we find that intensely pleasurable. And so a good comedian collects ways to do that, shares them with the audience, and he's listening. And so if you want to help someone, the best way to help someone is not to give them advice, but to listen to them. So
I had a guest actually come on this podcast before Jimmy Carr. Jimmy Carr was on 2 weeks ago, and we had a great conversation about happiness and the nature of happiness. And the guest before Jimmy Carr wrote in my diary, which is a tradition we have now, where all the guests that come on write a question for the next guest. So there is a question there for you. But the guest wrote a question which changed his life, which is, are you happy? And I, from reading your work and understanding your position on happiness and it not being the thing to aim for, which really struck me, because I thought, I thought life was the North Star of our lives was to try and be happy.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question is, what I was going to ask you that question.
Aim to be good and pray for happiness.
So the question I was going to is pretty much that is, what is a better question for me to ask you if I'm checking in on you? Because we asked that question with good intentions. Mm-hmm. Are you happy? What's a better question for me to ask Jordan Peterson?
How are you doing?
How are you doing?
Hmm?
How are you doing?
Watch.
Brilliantly and terribly. That's when you listen to a profound piece of music, one that sort of spans the whole emotional experience, it's not happy. Happy is elevator music, and probably you just shouldn't listen to that at all, right? And you think, why? Well, it's harmless, it's treacly, it's sweet, it's simple, it lacks depth, it's shallow, that's a problem. It doesn't have that deep sense of awe and horror, I would say, that is characteristic of the best of all music. You listen to some simple music, so-called. Hank Williams is a good example. The blues cowboy from the 50s who died of alcoholism when he was 27 and whose voice sounds like an 80-year-old man. Simple melody, but there's nothing simple in the song and in the voice. It's deep, it's like the blues. It's like black blues in the States from the 20s, and it was certainly influenced by that tradition. There's this admission of a deep suffering at the same time as you get the beautiful transcendence of the music. And that's meaning, that's awful in the most fundamental sense, but you need an antidote to suffering, and it has to be deep. And deep moves you tectonically, and it's not a trivial thing. But that's better than happiness. And maybe if you're lucky, while you're pursuing that and while you're immersed in it, you get to be happy, and you should fall on your knees and be grateful for that when it happens. You know, it's a gift. It really is a gift. And it comes upon you unexpectedly, your happiness, you know. But you aim to climb uphill to the highest peak you can possibly envision. And that's better than happiness.
Why did you include terribly?
How to detect early signs of a heart attack in 10